Hey friends, welcome back to Shift Happens. My name is Joe Smith. I'm your host and the lead pastor of an open and affirming church here in Florida called Shift. And with me today, I've got somebody that I connected with, oh, I don't know, I guess it's maybe a few months out now. We connected, we had a shared experience at the Post-Evangelical Collective Conference in Raleigh, North Carolina, which I'm sure people are going to get tired of hearing me talk about, but tough, suck it up because I'm going to. But today I've invited with me Melody Winderweedle, who shared that stage with me at the refrocking ceremony service, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know, we don't really know each other outside of that, but we connected on social media and we have this like deeply meaningful shared experience. And so I was like, you know what? She's perfect. So Melody, just thank you for coming on here and talking and sharing your story with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm not perfect, but I'm perfect maybe to talk to you about some things.
Yes, that's it. Yes, I feel that. So, Melody, you are currently a pastor, and
Yes.
where are you located at?
So we are located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the name of our church is Ecclessia Christian Fellowship,
Okay.
Ecclesia being the Greek word for church.
Yes.
So
I didn't realize that you were in Chattanooga. Somehow I missed that. Every time my family lives in Missouri, both of our families live in Missouri, and so when we make the trek, we try not to drive, but sometimes flights are just too crazy, just way too much. So we'll drive, and we stop in Chattanooga every time. That's our halfway point. So next time I'll definitely have to hit you up. So that'd be
you
awesome.
will.
Yes, for sure. I
Please
definitely will.
do. Please.
So tell us, what's your story? What was life like for little Melody? You're a pastor, so church shows up at some point in time. Was it there in Tennessee, or what did that look like?
Yeah. So I actually grew up in South Florida,
Oh, right
not
on.
where near, so Fort Lauderdale.
Okay.
Fort Lauderdale is where I was born. I did grow up in church, and it was a very conservative, charismatic church. So we had all of the fundamentalist kind of baggage. And then layered on top was this like charismatic Holy Spirit demon under every rock,
Mm.
going to haunt you at any moment narrative on top of that.
So that sounds
And
fun.
yeah, it was an experience. There was therapy involved and still is currently. So, as a 5-year old, I'm hearing about invisible demons that could potentially, enter my body and possess me. And if not that, then they're at least influential out there in the world. And then you layer the fundamentalism on top of it. So very like cloistered together, very like the world is dangerous and scary, like stick to your safe bubble of conservative, charismatic Christian church. And and then to layer on top of that, my dad was a pastor at this church, so we lived and breathed this church. And by the time I was in third grade, my parents were terrified of the Broward County school system, so I was pulled
Mm.
out of school and homeschooled, and so very sort of like secluded from what was going on around me. And at one point was told that I had a spirit of fear on me because what the reality was I was a very anxious child. And the way my anxiety manifested to this particular community was that I had a spirit of fear. So that was prayed out of me on several occasions. So there's a lot of baggage there for sure.
No
and then of
kidding.
course, and then of course, because of fundamentalism, women have a very specific role in that. So submissive, and we also had like in our particular iteration of church, it was a non-denominational church. All of the women wore head coverings. That was also part of our liturgy, I guess, or the way that we chose to be as a church. And so there were women prophesying, but that prophecy always had to be interpreted by one of the men of the church. And it's all very it was very interesting. And then my dad was the worship pastor and the youth pastor, and when I was 12 was felt called to move to a camp, like a retreat center in North
Mm.
Carolina, to be the associate director of that camp. And so the whole family moved when I was 12 up to North Carolina, where I was like, preteen. My whole life was transferred up to North Carolina, and the retreat center that we were a part of had very similar values, very much the same charismatic, conservative, fundamentalist upbringing.
Well, it seems like as you're going through your story, your family, maybe my guess is like not even aware of it, but it just feels like you just are getting more and more isolated within that movement because school, but now no school, and now you're just all church, and then all of a sudden, oh, we're moving away from everybody, and we're at a camp, and camps typically are not like in the middle of town. They're usually out. Church camps anyway.
Yes, and we were in a rural town as well. So like to move from like Fort Lauderdale, like
Yeah.
just north of Miami, into like rural Western North Carolina, tiny town. We did end up going to public school, and that was, interestingly enough, my parents felt safe enough for us to go to a school because it was a rural town. But that's sort of when I started to like begin to think like maybe this whole thing that we're doing over here isn't actually like even just that small move to the public school in Franklin was enough to sort of have me start thinking differently about things. Yeah, so they were right in some degree, like to keep me cloistered because the world has different ideas about things, but the different ideas weren't scary. So that was the difference. So
So
realizing that.
when did you're heading into your teen years and you're
Yeah.
still in school, did you just bide your time or were you one of those kids that are like, no, no, I'm not okay with this?
I was the kind of kid who's just like, whatever we're doing, I'm going to put my whole self into
Mm.
it. And I'm not going to ask too many questions. Or if I have questions, I'm going to be kind of quiet about them, but they're like in the background, but like we're here and we're doing it. So I'm going to put my whole self into it. So I was really involved in the camp. We had like summer programs where youth groups would come. And like during the year, we had missionary families come in for 2 weeks at a time. And I was like in it and I was going to be committed to it. Like I went to school and then I came home and I was like in the borderline cult that was this Christian camp that we were a part of.
Mm.
And at the same time, all of this is happening. The interesting thing is I continually was like sort of seen as a leader. So I was asked to be in charge of things. I was asked to, assist with curriculum for the kids who were there. I was asked to, be a camp counselor for the summer. I was asked to like lead in all of these ways. And it was happening in school too, like I was involved in a lot of extracurriculars and things like that. And I got involved in a local youth group in the town that we were a part of. So I would be really invested there, but then really invested at the youth camp too, and was kind of like had my hands in all these different things. But like a theme that came up was that like I had leadership qualities.
Mm.
And so even though I knew that within this bubble of conservative Christianity, that like women couldn't be lead pastors, that maybe there was a place for me to lead in other ways. Like maybe I could be, I was kind of told like, you would be a really great pastor's wife, or you could or you could lead the youth group, or you could be a leader to the kids, or it would be great if you could go into the mission field. But like those are sort of, with your leadership qualities, here's what you can do. And so I kind of had been sort of like, well, you're a leader and you want to stay doing, you want to stay involved with the church, so here's where you can fit in. And so
Such
that was sort of
backhanded
like,
compliments.
yeah, exactly. But at the time, I was really like,
Yeah.
okay, these are my choices. I'm in it. I'm here. And then I went to a conservative Christian college in Cleveland, Tennessee, Lee University.
Ah, I know Lee.
Yeah.
I've
So
been
that's
there.
what's, yeah, I will not be recommending it to my children,
No.
but it is a place that someone can get an education. and, um,
It is a
and
place.
it is a place that you can go for college. And while I was there, my freshman year, I got involved in one of the mission organizations there that was led by a woman. And she we had gatherings every Thursday, and she was the main communicator at those gatherings. She was like, she was she was leading it. There was no covering. She was a single woman. There was nobody sort of like over her. She was leading it. And I saw her up there like 2 or 3 weeks in, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And like seeing it from even at Lee University, seeing someone, a woman leading a ministry and doing that fully, I was like, oh no, I want to be a leader in my own right. I don't want to be married to a leader. I want to be a leader in my own right. And so that's when I started to allow myself to ask the questions about what I had been taught. So
So I'm
that
curious, yeah, because for me, not to interrupt, but for
no,
me,
right.
that was the first brick that I re-examined, and it fell apart very quickly, and so I had to replace, that with a new brick. If you're looking at like faith as a wall or whatever,
Mm.
that metaphor, was it difficult for you, or were your lived experiences really feeding into that? Like, I understand that these few passages that probably are written by Paul, but given to Paul, and like all these, blah 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 stuff, nerdy stuff. But um, did it did that allow it, or was that something that was like a hindrance because of all this conservative indoctrination? Like, was like, no, I can't. Do you know what I'm asking? Like, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that like how it started was I just ignored them.
Okay.
I just I just started, I was like, I'm just going to, I know that what's written here, I'm clearly not understanding because as a woman, I feel called to pastor. And so whatever I'm reading in scripture isn't jiving with what I feel called to do. So I'm just going to ignore those passages that are problematic. And which goes to a bigger question of like how I've now like as a result of all of that come to view scripture, which is,
Hmm.
another one of those like big bricks that we all have to like re-examine. But the way it started was for me to just ignore the problematic passages and lean into the passages that I found really empowering. So
Hmm.
like reading about Deborah, reading about Mary Magdalene, reading about Mary, the mother of Jesus, reading about, Phoebe and Junia and all of these women that we find in the Old and the New Testament who are being empowered to share the gospel in the ways that they can for the time in history that they live, and choosing to lean on that
Hmm.
instead of focusing on 2 or 3 problematic passages. So
Yeah.
that became sort of my response to it. Yeah.
So those were your first steps. And
Mhm.
I think that brings up a really important point that I think a lot of people that listen to this may or may not be wrestling with. And I only say it in that way because I think many have already moved past it. But just that wrestling of okay, well, what is this book? And how much authority do I allow it over my life? And that's really difficult coming from places that we grew up in. Mine wasn't charismatic, but still just as conservative. And it's really difficult to go, okay, what do I do with these passages? Because lived experience is not what they're saying. Like,
Yeah,
even just take you. Something is in my head as benign and uncontroversial as a woman leader. Like, just I don't know how it's still, I just don't. I can't wrap my head around it. But seeing that, being part of that, knowing women, friends, and seeing it from a distance, I mean, geez, take somebody as vanilla as Beth Moore. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but just as Southern Mama Beth Moore, right? Um,
yes,
but wrestling with that idea of like, okay, how much authority, and that is the question, because it's the authority we give it
that's right.
over our lives. And I think that's a really important point that you brought up of like, hey, not everybody handles it the same way, but this is how you did it, and it got you to a place of like real health. So yeah, I think
Mhm.
that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was sort of like my journey. And, I did end up getting married, but to a man who did not have any desire to be a pastor. That was not, he's a businessman, and left Lee University and found a vineyard church here in Chattanooga. got really involved. My husband was one of the worship leaders. I helped out in youth for a season. I helped out in kids for a season. We always had hosted a small group at our home. Eventually I took over the small group ministry. And then we were asked to be elders. And so like over the course of 15 years, well, I guess it was 10 years at that point, 10 years, we got very invested in the vineyard. And I bring that up because that whole time that we were in that space, the senior pastor, Jeff, was speaking into my life and like calling out my leadership, calling out my, giftings as a communicator, calling out all of this that I had known from a young age, but then had been told it only could manifest in these very specific pigeonholed ways. But here was a man
Mm-hmm.
telling me, no, you're actually very gifted. And then he kind of walked me through a lot of those problematic passages. And like, here's how like theologically we can come to a better understanding of what these passages mean. And so like there was another step of freedom in that, but it came as a result of a relational investment from a mentor, someone who was speaking life into an area that, up to that point had been very like limited life,
Mm.
right? Like rather than like complete freedom, it's like freedom to a point. And he was calling me out into something much more expansive and inclusive and liberative, and which was amazing. And the Vineyard denomination as a whole is an egalitarian movement as far as like women are empowered to lead in all levels of leadership, but not every vineyard holds that value. So when Jeff stepped down and asked, and initially it was my husband and I co-pastored together for a season, there were members of the congregation that were really uncomfortable with the fact that I was going to be a pastor over our community.
Oh.
So it was like this whole empowering, like, yes, 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 do and speak and all of this amazing stuff. And then when it was announced that I was going, my husband was still going to be leading worship, but I was going to be the main communicator on Sunday mornings. Like he was still working a full-time job. So I was going to be really embodying a lot of the like lead pastor role on the day-to-day stuff. There were people who had a lot of problems with that. Even so far as to, have a conversation with my husband, not with me, with my husband, and say things like, um, when Melody gets up on a Sunday morning to preach, what am I supposed to tell my daughters?
Look at this. Hey, daughter, look at this. Take notes. Take a picture. Oh my
Yes.
God.
I was like, it's actually a good thing I wasn't on that phone call because
No
I would have
kidding.
said, tell her that she can be whatever she wants to be. That's what you tell your daughter on a Sunday
Yeah.
morning when Melody gets up to preach. But that was not, again, they were seeing it as like a restriction from scripture. Therefore, for a woman to get up on a Sunday was being disobedient to scripture. And so there was no room for lived experience for this person. And then there were other families that had similar concerns with that. And so it was like I've been the pastor of this community for almost 9 years now. And the initial years were actually really tough. I didn't expect to experience the amount of misogyny in an egalitarian space as I
Hmm.
experienced
Hmm.
initially.
That's interesting. That's very,
Yeah.
very interesting. Um, it, I, I'm a girl dad, 100%. I loved every single second of all the tea parties, all the Barbie movies.
Mm.
She really was totally into the princess stuff. She's 22 now. Um, and I loved every single second of it in a way that I never thought possible, like before having a little girl. I had knew nothing about that stuff. And I only bring that up because for me, when I realized, and I'm almost ashamed of this, but it took having a little girl to like look up and be like, Oh, these teachings. Oh my God, no. I'm not telling my daughter any of this.
Mm,
I don't care. I don't care. I'm not telling her this. Like, if she wants to run the world, she's going to freaking run the world. Like, but that's what it took me. And
yeah.
if she had, thankfully, we were young enough. She was little enough when we moved here to Florida. She was still like middle school age, maybe early high school when she started being able to sit underneath women preaching and teaching. And then now that she's older, that's not even a big deal. Now she gets to experience like queer women and queer people of color. And my son is growing up underneath that. But for that to even be a question in somebody's mind to say, what am I supposed to tell my daughter when a woman's on the stage
Yeah.
is so mind blowing to me. Not to be crude, but I think my first response would have been, well, first, for even asking that question, pull your head out of your ass and then tell her this is exactly what God's designed you to do.
Right.
I
Right.
I am blown
Hmm.
away that a parent would
Yeah.
want to limit their own children because of something somebody wrote 2,000 years ago in a culture that doesn't relate to ours in any way.
Yes. Yes.
And then for you to continue to experience that on an ongoing basis
Yeah.
within a system that says, no, you are empowered.
Yeah. And I think that that was part of what I'm realizing on the other side of it is that like there's almost a like it's almost more nefarious
Mm,
in an egalitarian space because I think folks hide behind, well, we're letting you be a woman pastor. What else do you want from us? Like we're thinking it's liberative in that we're allowing you this privilege
uh-huh.
to pastor a community. And so that becomes the like, see, we're letting you do it. And then the way it plays out though is very I don't know, it's able to hide a lot
Mm,
of the undermining that happens, and I don't want to bore you with all the stories, but there were, constant conversations and policing of what I said on a Sunday morning, like how I presented myself, like how not to rock the boat to like keep people comfortable, which
mm,
really just led me to be a not the real version of who
yeah.
I am. I made myself smaller so that I didn't disrupt and and really wasn't being my full self, my authentic self. I was trying to be the pastor that made everyone comfortable rather than the pastor that I am. And it took a lot of years to get to a place where I'm like, I'm not actually going to I'm going to call Jesus a feminist on a Sunday morning. And if it makes you uncomfortable, we'll have a conversation about it. But I actually think for the time and the place that Jesus was living, he was actually radically feminist in comparison to,
Oh,
the
absolutely.
general culture. And if that makes you uncomfortable, we'll have a conversation, but I'm not going to not say it. I'm
Yeah.
not going to not say the things that I believe. And the end result of all of that was in 2020 our church split. So right before the pandemic, members chose to plant a church out of our congregation and be a church themselves, and really it was for the best. We were able to that really freed us up to become an affirming church, that freed us up to disassociate from the vineyard, that freed us up to um, make decisions that were sort of in line with our views of liberation, with our views of inclusion, with our views of like what it actually means to be the body of Christ, with our views about how we handle scripture. So there were so many ways in which we were trying to keep a community together that really vision wise, mission wise, were just not on the same page. And I
Mm.
think there are times, and it's admirable when we can hang together. And then there are times where it's just like we have to make the decision for our own health and our own sanity to just say it's time to like to break away and to acknowledge that we're doing different things. And yeah, it was
You know,
painful.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And the turmoil that goes through, and then the worry of like, okay, do I have a job? What do we do? We're here. Yeah, I get all of that. And I think it's really important what you just said about, it's nice when you can hang, but there are some moments where that line is drawn for you. And that was one of the things that I felt was so awesome at that conference that we were part of, that it was based on shared values and not a shared statement of belief. Like
Yes.
the freedom to the freedom of thought and opinion and theology was vast and
Mm.
represents a lot of the historical Christian tradition. But
Yeah.
we came together over shared values, and I think that's something that the church doesn't do well, or just our culture doesn't do well. But in particular, the church, that you have these shared values that drive these things, because you even mentioned just there that when the split occurs, your values drive you to not only like a womanist reading of scripture or view of it, but also queer inclusion and a larger look or a larger view of liberation. And they're all tied together.
That's right.
It's all
Hmm.
tied together. And when you can get away from like belonging is based on right belief,
Mm.
and instead of it being shared values, then those freedom issues, those liberation issues, kind of, I don't want to minimize it, but just almost they just, well, why wouldn't we? Well, I said it before we started recording that if you start making that move towards an egalitarian, which is there's no ceiling of limit for female pastors or leaders, it's literally the same process. It's like two more steps and it's full inclusion for the queer community as well.
Yeah. That's what some people call the slippery slope. Right.
It's just a water slide. It's fun.
Right. Which, and I think there are people who do stop, who choose not. I mean, one of the reasons that we left the vineyard was because they wouldn't move to an affirming stance on queer inclusion. And um, and that was sort of it for us. We have several queer members in our church who are like, we know that you're safe, but we don't know that the denomination that we associate with is safe. And that makes us feel unsafe now. And so
Hmm.
at that moment, it was like,
Okay.
then we're going to do what makes you feel safe. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And, there was a lot of like attempting to be like, can we stay and be a part of change? And they didn't want that. They wanted us to just leave. And that's unfortunate and painful. But I just remember sitting in board meetings before the split happened and having conversations about queer inclusion, because by this point I was fully affirming and had come to that realization over time. And we're there are folks in the room debating about what's appropriate levels of leadership for our queer siblings within the church organization, and what limits are we going to place on it. And I remember sitting there like, God, like, it was what, 10 years ago that you were having this conversation about me.
Mm.
And I wasn't in the room when you guys had that conversation. Where are our queer members in the room being a part of the situation? And I just remember sitting there being like, we're not doing this. Like, if you want to invite our queer siblings into the space, we can have this conversation. But as far as I'm concerned, if I'm allowed to be the lead pastor of a community, then my queer siblings are allowed to be lead pastors or lead in any level of,
Hmm.
whatever leadership that they feel called to lead in, period. Because we're not, what a dehumanizing practice to have a conversation about a whole group of people without them even being able to speak into it. It's horribly dehumanizing. And I felt that in that space as we were having this conversation. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
true, isn't it?
yeah.
That's interesting. So I'm telling you what I'm feeling right now,
Mm,
because I'm a straight white male pastor, Christian. So I say it a million times, I say it a million more. Like being born, I was just given keys to the kingdom. It's all yours, buddy. All the doors are unlocked, you know. And what were hallways for me are closed doors for so many others. So the idea of having a conversation in a church leadership role without those people in it, um, I don't know that I've ever even with all the work I've done, I don't know that I've ever even thought about all those meetings that I was a part of like that, and realizing, oh my gosh, even just that act was just so horrible. And
Mm.
just like realizing, and then thinking about it when we started our journey towards becoming open and affirming, when we realized, okay, we're not going back. One of my first calls was to, um, she's a good friend now, but her name is Tamara, and she was one of our first episodes because I felt like, okay, if we're going to talk about this, we got to have somebody to help guide it, who's living it. That was just completely unintentional, like, not thinking about it along these lines, but holy cow. Like that was a kick in the gut, what you just said for me personally. Like, oh man, I did so many of those. Oh God, I suck. You know?
The good part about that is like you you've done the work, right?
Well,
Like we
yes.
all have those moments. I mean, I sat through that meeting, right?
Yeah.
Like even though I had those feelings, but I was in it, I think that that's the like we learn from it. We realize the ways that it's dehumanized and we move forward, and like what a beautiful redemption arc that you and your community have
Yeah.
as a result of
And
that.
that's very
So
true, right? Like you do with what you got, and then like hopefully when you learn, when you learn better, you do better, right? That's the
yeah.
saying. And I'm really interested in your story as far as this idea of the, liberation, where you're coming from a very patriarchal system that's problematic in so many ways, you know, teaching a 5-year-old the possibility of an evil spirit taking over your body or influencing you in any way. My gosh, that's just so, ugh. But then add in the layer of like this complementarian. And if you're not a church nerd, we said that word a few times. Think everybody has seen that umbrella meme where it's got the umbrella of God, and then underneath God is husband, then underneath husband is wife, and then children. And that being like put together by a cult leader, by the way.
Right.
But that larger view of liberation, how, for you personally, how did that coming to terms with your gifting, your if you want to use the word calling to be a leader within the church, how did that lead you and your experience lead you to see, oh wait, there's all these other layers of this that are also problematic, and if I'm going to be here, then other people should be here too. What was that journey for you? And I know that's probably would take you years to unpack, but what was that really maybe first started shifting your thinking towards a fuller liberation theology?
Mm. Yeah, I don't know like what moment along the way that it sort of clicked different, but I think part of it happened just in listening to the stories of other, you know, other marginalized
Hmm.
folks. Um, my husband and I committed one full year to only read Black authors, and that's for the whole year. I think it was 2018. All we did was read Black authors that whole year. And how does that like listening to the voices of other folks reframe for us the ways that like our whiteness has, again, given us doors open to us that have just not been open to people because their skin is darker. And so some of it has come just through the practice of listening,
Hmm.
which I think that we don't as a whole do very well. Um, but even on like an even more like baseline level, it seems so simple and yet it's a really powerful truth. But beginning to think about humanity as originally good
Mm.
versus originally depraved. And so that theology shift for me, which again happened over
Yeah.
time, like I don't know, but like coming to understand that humanity is originally good. And every person that I come face to face with, every person that I read, every story that is told by somebody who has the breath and spark of the divine within them as baseline creates immediate dignity and respect
Mm-hmm.
that we should all be offering each other. And I say that And I say that, and I truly mean that. And I even say that about folks like, Donald Trump, right? Has the spark of the divine within his body, right? Within himself, is an image bearer of God. I say his name just because,
Oh yeah. No, no, no.
there are just like, it's not like it's an easy thing to say, and it's not something that's like all flowery and like kumbaya and whatever and hippy dippy. It's like there's a very real sense in which like we as a society and like humanity have devalued each other because we've come under the assumption that we are all bad and we have to do steps X, Y, and Z to become good, rather than seeing us as good and just bad stuff has happened to us.
Mhm.
There's like choices that we have made for ourselves that has caused brokenness. There's things that have been done to us that has caused brokenness, right? But like at our core,
Mhm.
the spark of the divine resides. So when I'm in a meeting and we're debating whether or not people have intrinsic value, that's when I start to think this is not, this is not. If I'm free, then everybody's free. Like my liberation is entwined with everybody else's liberation. And until we as a body of Christ, like can collectively get our heads out of our asses and fight for the liberation of everybody, like there's going to continue to be division. There's going to continue to be infighting. There's going to be continue to be like this devaluing of humanity. I could go on and on and on, but I think it starts there. It starts with like envisioning every single person as an image bearer of the divine at baseline.
And while you're talking, of course, we align in that completely. And that was that was one of those moments where I was just like, boy, that changes everything. And for me, it was Celtic theology that really did it. Reading about Celtic theology was just like, oh, why didn't we listen to Pelagius
They
instead of
just,
Augustine? And yeah, just like, and I know this is totally nerd. There are people listening like, what? What did you just say? Yeah, Pegasus? What?
yeah.
Um,
Me and Joe are
no,
vibe.
yeah. But
Mm,
it's almost, and I'm seeing it more and more. It's not even a division within like the church as far as like, well, we're Southern Baptist and we're uh Free Will Baptist or whatever denomination. It's almost literally a different system, almost a different religion altogether. Where if I come at you with the viewpoint of like, you're intrinsically good, you you have to choose to mask that. Like if you're talking in the case of Donald Trump, I cannot imagine what it was like growing up underneath his dad, how that wounded that little boy to create what has become this person, and
yes.
how hard you have to work at being that way to be that way.
Mm,
Um, is not what we grew up underneath. Of like,
right.
no, that's your baseline. Total depravity. That's who you are. You're lower than worms. And thank God that Jesus showed up to save you from God. And if you choose Jesus, then he will save you from what God will do to you if you don't choose him.
Right.
Just, um, but how, I see people now,
Mm,
like you just described, and being able to see like the richness and beauty, the things that people like you have brought to the table. And the people like I just got done with Angela Parker's book. If God
mm,
Can Breathe, Why Can't I? She was at that conference and
mm,
listening to the stories of, my queer friends of faith and non-faith, but just how much they bring to the table. It's
mm,
just like I miss all of that if I stay over here.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So that listening posture, that posture of humility that yeah, I use this phrase, I made it up, but it's holy arrogance.
Mm.
And I think that it is like the sort of, it is the downfall of evangelicalism is holy arrogance. It's we have everything to offer and nothing to learn. So if you're not living up to our standards, you deserve hell, and the Bible is, inerrant and infallible except for the parts that make me uncomfortable, but it's okay. I'm allowed to choose to say that those are metaphor because I have the authority as the right kind of Christian to decide what's metaphor and what's not in scripture. That whole energy is just what's killing evangelicalism. And I think that maybe it's just time for it to die.
Oh, I agree. Yes, please.
Evangelicalism as a whole.
Yes,
Um,
please. Yes. Yeah, I feel that. I'm curious how that has shaped what you do now. How do you approach that? You're on social media, and we'll have that in the show notes for people that want to, follow along. But you have how do I say this? Like you just don't take any crap. I mean, that's at least the image you portray, right? Because especially when it comes to this idea of like misogyny and the patriarchal system that's within the church, um,
hmm,
that's kind of like I don't want to say your lane
my
because like
niche.
that was yeah, there
Yeah.
you go, your niche. Thank you. Um, how does your past experiences and what you do now with your church there in Chattanooga, how does that inform everything? Like, how do
Hmm.
they take your public stances with social media?
Yeah. Thankfully, my church is amazing. So after the split happened, the people who stayed like actually valued me as their pastor, right? They listen to women preach and think,
A
yes,
great
how much
church.
can we learn? How much can we learn from women? You know, and so they're very supportive. I don't the feedback that I get from the people who attend my congregation is like they're usually the ones who are like yes and amening and sometimes clapping back at the folks who put unhelpful things um on there
Yeah.
and like coming to my defense in a lot of ways, which I always really appreciate. But that's been a journey. Personally, I was really quiet on social media for a long time about what I experienced as a woman pastor in an egalitarian space who was still experiencing patriarchy and misogyny, even in an egalitarian space. And so I didn't for a long time want to push back on that for all of the reasons. Like, the number of times I get in the comments, okay, someone needs to read their Bible, as if I'm not almost done with my MDiv, right? That I haven't already done the study, that actually, like, I've probably done more study because it affects me more directly than it affects you, white
Yeah.
man,
Joe Blow commenter. Yeah.
right? Like, Theo bro is what I like to say.
Oh, yes.
Um, and so like for a while, and then when I started, my God, like people just came after me like so like mean. Like I had to delete death threats and report things like that from people who just had a really strong opinion against what I was saying. And I've gotten to the point now where it's like I actually have a pretty strong theological leg to stand on against some of what you're saying, all of what you're saying actually, and I'm tired of like sort of like cowering in the corner and letting you take up all of the space and all of the air. And there are actually a lot of us who have a lot of really good things to say, and you might be the loudest voice, but I'm not even actually sure that you're the majority voice. You're just talking the loudest. And so I do it not just for myself, I do it for all of the women out there who are experiencing the same thing and want to hear like, oh my gosh, me too, and how can we do better?
Hmm. And
So but
I find that that's the beautiful part of social media, right? There's so much of it that can be so ugly. You can create your own echo chambers. Um,
yeah.
I'm the part I struggle with is like my motivation for
Mm,
doing that. I'm horrible at like self-promoting, and sometimes it just feels that way. And then I have to remind myself, wait a second, though. Just like you said, there are people that are
yes.
walking in the same spaces that won't or can't or just, don't have it to do it. And it gives like you doing like that. There was one video you did recently where it's a comment of something and you were just like shaking your head and I can't remember what the sound was, But it was,
I know more than you.
yes, that's it. That was it. Yes. Yes. It
Yeah.
was perfect. I love Parks and Rec anyway. So that
Yes.
was perfect. But just that short little clip, right? There's gonna be somebody that's experiencing the same stuff and they're gonna laugh, but they're gonna be like, yes, somebody sees me and I'm not alone. And then that gives them permission to be like, wait, it is okay to be here, or it is okay to feel this way, or it is okay to say these things. And I think that's the really beautiful part of
Yeah.
things like social media.
Yeah, just like one more piece to that too that I think is really important to name because I've talked about like external misogyny. There's an internal misogyny that happens within women where we doubt, is it okay for me to say that I know more than someone on a particular subject? Because we've been taught for so long that like our stance is to be submissive and quieter and smaller. So when we do say things like, I actually know more than you about this, we have an internal dialogue within ourselves, women do, that says, should I be saying that? Is it okay for me to let people know that I actually have an education, that I have the receipts, that that I've done the study? And my hope is that as I'm untangling my internalized misogyny out loud, other women are encouraged to untangle their internal misogyny that's keeping them in a spiral and
Hmm.
keeping them from walking out their calling to be empowered to do the work that they're called to do. Because I think that that's another piece of it that we don't always talk about, is
Hmm.
the internalized oppression and misogyny and like thought cycles that we have as women, where we start to question our assertiveness.
So when that happens, and I'm sure you've already done this work, I mean, it sounds like you have, is that when that occurs, you start saying or you start doing this and that voice pops up, is that coming from the place that like internally is like the voice of God? Or do you recognize, you know what I mean? Because like it's handed down to you by people that are supposed to be the mouthpiece of this all-knowing, all-creating thing.
Yes.
Is that how you experience that?
Yes. And so then it becomes, there's this whole process of like, what is the narrative that I'm believing? Where's that narrative coming from? How is that actually not the voice of God? And how can I name that? Because the voice of God is always loving and affirming and empowering. So if there's a narrative that's not that, where's that coming from? And what does God have to say in response to that? Right. So it's a whole process that I have to do within my mind. And my husband and I talk about all the time. He's like, I don't ever have to do that. And so if I can, like, I mean, thank God for therapy and spiritual directors. Like, I will say that all day long. Get yourself a therapist, get yourself a spiritual director. If you're a leader in a church, you need both. And maybe sometimes even a coach, but at least those two to help you untangle the false narratives that have just like sort of embedded themselves, disguising themselves as the voice of God, right? Because it's what we've been taught.
Hmm.
Um, and, like I mean, in a lot of ways, frankly, it's just because the patriarchy is the waters that we swim in, it's a lot easier to just let it happen.
Hmm.
You know, like there are times when I'm like, gosh, is any of this worth it? Is it even worth? I feel like I'm just disrupting all the time, creating chaos, right? In these spaces that have thousands of years of history. And here I walk in as a woman and my very presence is disruptive before words even come out of my mouth. And and the answer is yes, it's worth it because the patriarchy is not from God. That is not a hierarchy in which God desires for us. And that's a whole other podcast if you want to go there about why
Hmm.
hierarchies that we've set up are not actually, they're man-made, they're not God-made. And so like the work that we as women do to show up into spaces and just have our presence be there and let them be disruptive is actually really good work. So, yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. Um, like in a good way. Like there's a lot of good stuff to dig through.
Mm.
When you mentioned that your husband told you that he doesn't have to do that. I don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, um, it very rarely does it matter to me if you know more than me, if we're talking about something. Like you can be more educated than me. That doesn't intimidate me. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
I don't know if that's just intrinsic to, like you said, the system, or it's my personality, or something of both. Um, and I feel very comfortable swimming in waters that are deeper, and
Mm.
still like that's fine. You can maybe you know more about this culture, but like you know what I mean? Like that's just not
Mm.
something I internally struggle with. And I have to wonder, not wonder, but for the sake of this, I have to wonder in the shared experiences of people that are pushed to the sidelines by a majority culture. So, and to varying degree, right? Like not everybody is pushed as far away as others, right? So you're pushed further away that, I mean, shoot, I'm the center. Let's just be honest. Or people like me, we're the center, right? We're the majority culture, or have been. We're pushing everybody else to the side. You may not be pushed as far as somebody that's a trans person of color, but you're still pushed to the side. And there are still shared experiences.
Mm.
One of those shared experiences are internalized things that are harmful. So we had, like, early on, I had somebody who's a friend. She's queer. She's also a therapist. And she talked about internalized homophobia.
Mm.
And it sounds a lot like what you just described. And then
Mm.
you talked about the system, the waters we swim in is patriarchy. And it was another one of those reminders of it's what the system is designed to do. It's not that the
Mm.
system is broken, it's designed to make you feel this way internally about yourself because
Yeah.
I'm the person the power is supposed to be structured around. And if
Hmm.
you're doubting yourself, if you're doubting your own voice, work is already doing itself. I don't have to worry about you.
That's right.
Just another reminder of that. Oh man.
I love that you said the system is actually working because I think, yeah, I think that you're right. Like we talk all the time, like the system is broken. No, it's doing its job well. We just need to break down the system. Like
Oh
we,
man, Melody. Holy cow.
yeah,
Huh.
that like our presence in the system is what's breaking it. It needs to be broken. It's actually working
Oh,
quite
now you're preaching.
well.
Now you're preaching. And it's true. I've got
Yeah.
that good friend of mine tomorrow. We had a long conversation about her, being a queer woman, and how she, before we started what we did, she had been out of church for like 10 years.
Mhm.
And specifically because she just didn't find a space. She wasn't liturgical, so the mainline churches here in town that have long been affirming just didn't really speak to her with the liturgy. Um, but she said she just got tired of fighting. She just got tired of being a disruptor because she said so much of my life in the work that she does outside of church is that. And she felt like I just need to find a place where I can just be and not have to fight. I just need a table that fights for me some. And
Mm.
that was just so heartbreaking to hear her
Mm.
say that because number one, that's just not my experience. And I don't know that I'd ever heard anybody put it like that before.
Mm.
And it was just honoring that she shared that with me, and just so humbling that she felt like the table at our little faith community was that for her, is that
Mm.
for her. But man, just another reminder of what you just said, of just it's this shared experience with everybody pushed to the sidelines.
Yeah. 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 And then to have a community where you have that space to rest, and then you also have that community that's going to fight alongside you so
Mhm.
that there is that, right? So like I'm not just doing all of this work by myself. I've
Right.
got an amazing community that's supporting me, both my church community as well as people outside of that. You have your table that you've set that is a place of rest, and then like that becomes in its own way a disruption to the system, right? Because we're creating places for rest to happen for the folks who are doing the fight. And then by being that place of rest, it's disruptive so that those people can continue to do the work. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
So I had a Zoom call with this is adjacent to what you just said, but I had a Zoom call a week ago with a bunch of state church leaders in Florida about the PEC, kind of starting a regional hub. We don't have one down here. And the director of the PEC, Carrie, Ledecker. Did I say your last name right? Is that right? Do you
I
know?
think so.
I
Yeah,
think I said it right. Okay.
sounds
Anyway,
right.
so she sent me some stuff to talk about. And one of the things that they're looking at are like these pockets of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And you talking about like being disruptors, it's the same thing.
That's right.
Like creating, and it's insane to think that just these little faith communities and non-faith communities, let's be honest, that are popping up or different faith communities. I am tying into a local Buddhist community that has really revolutionized how I pray and
Mm,
meditate in some ways that I just not thought possible. But all these little pockets of resistance, all these little pockets of, disrupting people, and it's all based on things like inclusion and rest.
mm,
And that's crazy that those are the values that are disrupting what's current.
mm-hmm.
And you guys are up there doing that. You're experiencing that. You're participating in that.
Mm-hmm. Because the system thrives on exclusion and work,
Mm,
right? What, how much value can I bring by what I bring to the table instead of you belong and you can rest, right? Like, again, we can put capitalism in there too, right? Because as soon as you lose your value, as soon as you lose the ability to work and to offer something to society, you're excluded because you can no longer work. And so what we are creating in our pockets of resistance is a place where you are immediately included just for being you, and you can rest. And so it's that right there.
mm,
That's it.
that's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. And I got lots of thoughts swirling, so I'm trying to gain. I'm just trying to grasp one of them, because it's so antithetical to everything that, like I grew up in, like taught, like educated at school, right? To do and then practice for so long. Um, and it is. It's just like we would, for those that know our story, I came on as lead, or I came on as in staff in 2018, and my wife and I took over, and not took over, but it was like we stepped into the lead roles in like 2021. And before we had like a space where you could just set your stuff and like leave it, we were set up in tear down. And we were just like any other evangelical church in town, just a really harder version because it was set up and tear down in a middle school. And we chewed through families like there was no tomorrow. And we realized it. We did our best to try to curtail it to the other leaders that were leading at the time. They were very aware of it and did their best. But to do church in that style literally just killed people, like just
Mm-hmm.
tore through people. And it's eye-opening to me that you're talking about like rest and inclusion and just valuing people is a disruption to that. I don't know that I've ever thought about it in those terms. Just valuing people disrupts the evangelical church system.
Mm-hmm. Because the evangelical church system, like the larger society, places all the value on what kind of work you offer. Like, that's it. Like, you are valued for as much as you can offer, period.
Well, let me ask you
And
this. Let me ask you
yeah.
this on that one, because I don't want to forget this question. Does that play into the devaluing of women or the other in the church because you're automatically placed at a lower level? Because there's so many ceilings. Does
Yes.
that does that
Yes. Yes. And yeah, oh my gosh, like now you're blowing my mind with like how to think through that because I haven't put all this together myself, but like yes, so because we're there are levels, and so if I hit that imaginary glass ceiling that I don't know actually exists, all of a sudden I've become too much. And so I need to be like squelched down. because now I've like crossed an invisible line that I didn't know was there as a woman, right? Or as an other for whatever reason, race, gender, sexual orientation, all of those reasons, because at the very top is white men. I mean, yeah,
Oh, you're not hurting
you
my
said it.
feelings.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
and so, and so like there's these like levels. And so it's almost like a paradox in a way, because we value you for what you offer to the community unless you offer something that is outside of the boundaries that we've already set. So there's
Mhm.
that like there's that piece of it too that I think is at play, that like, I'm over here like, I'm willing to speak on a Sunday morning. I'm willing to be a pastor, and they're like, "No,
That's cute. Thank you.
that's cute.
Yeah.
Go hang out with the kids. I'm sure there's something you can say to one of them." Um but then, someone else, I mean, we did set up and tear down for like 3 or 4 years before my husband and I were the pastors. So I feel you on all that. Like our church, we always talk about like our church grew to half the size in those 4 years. Like we were like a 500 member church. And by the end of our setup tear down season, we were 250.
Yeah.
And then we just continued to dwindle down from there. Now we're a happy 25 and we love it.
Yeah. We're
But
we're less than 100 too. Yeah.
yeah. So, but I mean, anyways, so there's like the both sides of that, I think, where the people who are willing to do the work but even that, they're not being valued for who they are, right?
Yeah, because
Uh,
if you're only valued for what you can bring and what you can bring is already limited, then your value from the get-go, before you volunteer for anything or say anything, your value is already lesser
yeah.
the further away you're pushed.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
only you only bring, let's say, 75% of my value to the table
Right.
immediately. Are you a woman and queer?
Yeah.
That's going to drop it down to 60. Are
Mm.
you a queer person of color? Even less.
Yeah.
Let's throw in transness, right? And
Yeah.
it drops way down. And so, like, just listening to you
Mm.
talk, I'm thinking, like, just from the get-go in that system, your value, your cap is already placed before you step foot in the building.
Right.
And then
Yes.
how could you ever belong?
Yes. Because isn't that what we all want? That's the desire, is belonging, I think.
Oh, I think
I
so
think
too.
we all want belonging. Yeah. I think that's the spark of the divine in us, is a
Mm.
desire for belonging.
Which again, if we're going to nerd out, I think is really the basis for the idea of a Trinitarian view of God, this flow and
Right.
relationship
Yes.
within
Yes.
God that we describe
Mhm.
as something called the Trinity. Uh,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
hmm.
Hmm. Yeah.
Melody, I want to honor your time. You're a pastor of a small church, which is much harder than a large church. I I'll die on that hill. I've been a pastor at both, and it's so much harder at a small church. Um, and so I want to honor your time, but I could literally talk 2 more hours about this. And I have so many other questions and so many other things that I wanted to get
Yeah.
to, but I want to honor your time. I might
Yeah.
holler at you later and just be like, hey, we need a part two to this.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah, because there were so many things that were brought up that came out of this conversation that speak to the so many larger themes that I think so many people struggle with in and outside the church or just our culture, period. So just thank
Hmm.
you so much for bringing your perspective and the hard work that you do. And just personally, I hope and pray that you have the ability to continue to do that hard work.
Mm. Thank you so much, Joe, for inviting me. And I'm always up for another conversation. So
Oh, that's
this was
that's
really
it's going to
enjoyable.
happen. It's going to happen. It's going
Awesome.
to happen, and it's going to happen soon. So when we get off here, I'm going to talk to you about it. I
Nice.
will have the show notes. In the show notes, I'll have your Instagram handle, which is
Great.
where I'm guessing most people can find you the easiest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then, are you cool? I'll link your church on there as well. Your stuff.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. We'll put all that
Mhm.
on there. So if
Great.
anybody's interested in contacting Melody or her church, if you're listening in Tennessee, because we've got some, and you're looking for a safe place to go, then go find Ecclessia there in Chattanooga, and we'll have that in the show notes. Melody, thank you again for taking time out of your day to come and share part of your story and get really nerdy and deep with us. That was awesome.
It was a joy. It was a
Yeah,
delight.
good. Well, thanks for following along, everybody. Go check those show notes, and go follow Melody on Instagram. And are you on TikTok too? I don't.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
too
on
old for
TikTok.
it, I think.
I'm on TikTok, but the algorithms lately suck. And that's a whole nother podcast. But
Yeah.
go find her, go follow her, check out our church, all this stuff. And thank you for following along. We hope that you are having just a beautiful day. Now get out of here. Go love on some people.